Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Bafun, and this podcast is an extension of my book, also called Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, and poetry on things like fatherhood, identity and belonging, growing up, creativity, and the lessons learned. The purpose of this podcast is to gain insight and learn from the journeys that others have taken. I explore the worlds of art, culture, design, business, creativity, and life from the perspective of Africans who are contributing to the redefinition of the continent and who we are. So my guest today is Jabulani Dhlamini, who's a photographer and project manager for a community-based photography program called Of Soul and Joy, based in Thokoza Township. How are you, Jab?
Well, thank you, my brother.
Can I say Jab?
Yes. You know.
So, to start off, I'm going to start off in a very strange place.
Sure.
So when I was busy doing research for our conversation,
Sure.
I was online, I was looking at some of the photographs that you've made over the years. And then one looked familiar. And then I went into my phone.
Sure.
So last year I went to the FNB Joburg Art Fair.
Sure.
And the first artwork that I stopped in front of for longer than, because half the time you'll see stuff and it doesn't pull you in. So you'll spend, you'll look at it, it's nice, and then you move on.
Yeah.
The first artwork that I stopped in front of and eventually took a picture of. We're not doing video, but this is the artwork.
Sure.
So I went and researched it. So the photograph is called Mkhulu Makomo Dhlamini.
Yes.
And was taken in Warden in 2022. The thing that fascinated me about it is that it's a photograph of a photograph.
Sure.
On the wall.
Yeah.
Who is this person?
Yeah, this is Umakom. It's my great-grandfather. He was he was a cameraman, I like to call. He was a street photographer. He did, but while I was young, I still remember I used to cry for him wherever he goes, and then he called me that, my name, like as in I'm part of the car, like as in the carriage, like the horse, because of his horse can't move without me. I had to be there always, And for me, this image, when I went back to Warden, because I was born in Warden, and that for me spoke to that time, but also spoke to, because of his riding on a horse, when I went to in the Free State, when I was driving in Free State a lot, I saw a lot of monuments of the past.
Yeah.
They were on a horse.
Always on horses.
And for me that, gave me that. This time it's my grandfather. I had that in my mind, and hence I was photographing with that memory in it.
Is that how you came to photography? Is the influence him?
Sure. No, not at all. Actually, when I grew up, he was a street photographer, but I was not aware that time because he used to take a bag and, but I was very young at that time, and I went back to KZN, and then we moved to Soweto.
Okay.
Yes, in 1991. So we moved to Soweto. But how I started with photography is that my mother had a small compact camera on top of the room divider that I think she got it from one of these marathons. She was running marathons, and she left on the room divider. And one day when I was doing my grade 5, which was 1996, I decided to take that camera without her knowing to school, and it had a film inside, and I started photographing my friends in a class in the school. They started posing. For sure, it had a lot of mistakes in. So because I still remember, I always after developing the film, because I had to tell her, and she developed the film for me, and so the photographs had a lot of mistakes. Could see my fingers, But I learned through that, because I think at that time when you develop a film, they would give you a free film.
Okay.
And so they'll load it for me, and then she would give it back to me. And I think on the third one, that's when she told me that I need to start charging my friends so that they can assist me in making sure that they get their
She was getting tired of paying for the development.
Sure. Because I think we were 10 at home at that time, and she's a single mother, and but that became for me a way out. And I would then later on when she said that to me, I started charging them like 5 rand. And I saw how it helped even at home. I could now buy things that I wanted. The pressure of growing up, starting to be 13, 14, you want to dress certain labels and stuff. So I would then afford to buy my 3 brothers at that time who were in the same age, Yeah. And even at home, I would also, buy help to buy some groceries and stuff. So for me, the love started like that, and I started being a street photographer in a way, because they started inviting me when they're having parties and weddings and stuff. Yeah.
And also an interesting time, because we're talking the early days of that transition.
Sure.
Into democracy.
Yeah.
And with a lot of hope about what the future might look like, without knowing what the future might look like.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in 1996, for me, a lot of things were happening so that's when my foundation in a way was laid, part of the concept of a Rainbow Nation. Yeah, that's when, yeah. But for me, I mean, that brings me to thank a lot of the street photographers who were there before, because I was the youngest. I was 13 years old. They used to mentor me a lot. After developing a film, all of them sit around the table, and they'll look at my photographs and give me feedback. No, but here you're supposed to do 1, 2, 3. For sure, they were not using the language that I when I went to university that I learned. But they would always make sure for me, I call it an understanding language. So they make sure that I understand that you need to do it's F banbani, and then the speed needs to be at 100 when you're shooting outside. Make sure and those things. Yeah. So for me, that I have always respect. I always heavy respect for the street photographers.
Because we learn in different ways, right?
Sure.
So we don't.
Sure.
For a lot of people, and I think it's across the continent, we didn't necessarily have access to certain spaces to learn the, let's call it in inverted commas, academic language.
Sure.
But sometimes the mechanic who taught himself sometimes can find the problem quicker than the mechanic who was taken through school.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's true.
I mean, when I'm nowhere near a photographer, but I remember doing a digital photography course.
Sure.
And I still haven't got my head around f-stop, shutter speed, all of that, because I sat in a classroom and I was taught that, and we experimented a bit, but I did not practice it a lot. Whereas the lessons you were getting, and on top of that, talking about film, because I also come from that era.
Sure.
You're taking a picture and you only know what it's going to look like in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, and there was that language of the images, but it's Sheila, that band. Yeah. So always would have those, that thing of hoping, good, yeah, for sure, the image looks like this, and but I fell in love with also these stories that came when I was a street photographer. A lot of people trusted me. I was young, and people are going through a lot, and they would trust that, today I think those conversations are happening in a barber, where the hair salons and stuff. But at that time, I was a cameraman, because they know I would walk from home in Piri to Kliptown, walking. And that's far, and they would only see me maybe once a week. So they would open up to me. They would tell me a lot of stories, and I fell in love with those stories. I felt like hence I said normally that's where my foundation comes from, because I fell in love with those stories. And previously for sure, because at home it was in the rural areas, and we didn't have a TV. And so that's the love of stories, is that we used to listen to radio stories. And for me, that built a lot of my background in a way, because of I still remember I was very interested in the characters that I was listening to the radio, and I would always ask, my grandfather, my grandmother, because of that was a very important time. Even when you were about to wash the dishes, when the radio story is about to play, you have to wait. It needs to be quiet. And that taught me the importance of this. And I would ask my grandfather and my grandmother and my my brothers and sisters, and I would see that they build a different character towards what I was listening to. And I would always be like surprised, okay, this is the character for me, and it looks like this and this, and for you, and so it was that interesting part that I normally, always love in terms of storytelling,
And in a way, it helps you with visual storytelling, because
Sure.
it's like reading, because you're creating the character, you're creating how they look, you're creating the scenes in your mind as it's ongoing, just from voice.
Yeah. So for me that was an interesting learning background in a way, because even at school, I think when I was doing grade 1 and 2, because we were in one class, like grade 1 until 5.
Sure.
You had one class in this, and the grade 1 and grade 2, we had to be given something to be kept busy. And most of the time, it's either they give you a clay, and you need to do 1, 2, 3. And I didn't know that that when the love of art was planted, in a way.
How do you handle, as a 13, 14-year-old, stories of adults at a time when there's a lot going on?
Sure.
And I'm sure some of those stories were not, it's not just the happy stories.
Sure.
A lot of the stories are one, pain, struggle and hardship, but also perhaps the other side, relationships, joy, and things that a 13, 14-year-old shouldn't be hearing about.
Sure.
As I'm standing in the corner with my girlfriend, and I want you to take a picture of us.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would say at that time, because of I normally say to a lot of even my mentees that when you start, you always have this energy, and it takes you through a lot of things. And I remember I a lot of, especially not good stories, like not good challenging relationship stories, but the energy, I think the energy of starting photography kept me through, and that became then my way of, I would always want to hear those stories. I don't know, I fell in love with those stories later on, a lot of, that's when I realized a lot of people were raised by single mothers, a lot of such stories, because even at home, I think we in the street where I lived, I think we only had our friends in a group of 13, only 2 had fathers. So the language of a father was not in our vocabulary at all. But we didn't see that as a wrong thing, it was normal. It was normal, and sure.
Because that's what you're exposed to, and that's what, like you're saying, other people,
sure.
The people around you are going through the same thing.
So when I heard those stories, for example, if I photograph a child and the mother is complaining about the father, and I thought, even at home I hear these stories, I grow up hearing, because I was not raised by my father, and hence this image becomes an important, the one you shared, like for me, it becomes an important image, because that was my memory when I was young, in that space of living with my father and my mother. And I was very young at that time, and I had to go back and maybe relook at the space and connect with the space, and sure.
So having gone from that kind of space, which you described as rural, but also a lot more in terms of like family ties and community,
sure.
to the township where you're growing up, which has its own structures and own relationships and own dynamics.
Sure.
And connecting the two. How do you end up then studying? You studied what? a national diploma in
in
photography.
photography.
How were you at school? Like, how were you at school?
Sure.
That you decide in the, still in the 90s?
Sure,
that you're going
sure.
to study photography.
So for me, I didn't know that photography could be a career because at that time, then access was very difficult. So I've never met anyone who was a photographer. Like, I always met a street photographer, and I used to call myself, like I would give myself titles, best photographer of the year, when I was doing my grade 5, like grade 8. And I remember there's one teacher would always tell me, but you must go and study photography and stuff. But it didn't make sense to me. But I think when I finished my matric, I went, because I've always wanted to be a pilot. And why is that I understood science and maths. And everyone in the class wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to say something different. And that I ended up falling in love with it. I thought this was made for me, and I wanted to be a pilot. And even when I was doing my matric, I applied for the South African Defence Force. And that's where I met photography as a career. Because when I went there, I saw photographs on the wall. And I remember asking one of we call him Sergeant, or like the person who was in charge of us. I asked him, but how do I become this person? Because I had my camera with me, and I asked him, but how do I become this person? And he told me that their photographer studied at TUT. He did photography there. And, but I had, at that time, I had stomach ulcers. And I still remember we did training, and at that time, because of missing meals, because of the training and stuff, it got worse. And I was told that this is curable. You're still young. You can come back. And when I went back home, one girl that we grew up from Ekasi was graduating at VUT, and I went. And a friend of mine whom I studied with at high school. And he knew that I love photography and stuff. And then when I went to VUT, I was doing engineering, but he took me to the art department, and that's when I decided, no, I'm not going back anymore to the Air Force, but I'm enrolling to study photography.
So the one time in life when ulcers actually helped
Sure.
to push you down the path you're supposed to be on.
Sure. And for me, hence I've always made it my mission that. It's more, for sure, it's from our cameraman mentoring. For me, hence mentoring is a very special way of teaching, and I felt no, it's not it was not a must, but I felt that it was their way of sharing themselves to me. And I've always embedded that to me. Even when I was at school, I remember when I was doing my third year, second year, I would always want to assist. I would always want to, even look at, the first years, where are you guys? And and for sure, because of the culture, when you go to the university, you see the culture is different from ECAS. ECAS, we're helping each other. At university, you see this person eating, and then you don't have food, but the person is eating next to you. And then you ask yourself a lot of things. But I said, no, man, I can't be swallowed by this, I need to make sure that, if I have 4 slides, let me share. So even at school, just in general, I would look at that, would say, okay, where am I, and what's the other person doing at that time, And it was because from the mentoring of, sure.
I mean, we're going to veer off because I think you're talking about something that's very important, because we talk about, we use words like words like give back.
Sure.
And we use words like mentorship, but never actually thinking about what it actually means.
Yeah.
For you, what does a mentor look like? And what does a mentee look like? And I ask this question because I've been approached at times, on occasion, I've been approached to mentor someone.
Sure.
And my first question always is, what do you think that mentorship looks like?
Yeah.
Before we get into yes or no,
Sure.
I need to
sure,
understand.
Sure.
I need to understand how you see it, because I found that when people don't engage in it,
Yeah.
it's, oh, you're going to come and solve my problems as a mentor.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important question, which I always, for me, because I always say, I might be wrong, I always say teaching becomes for me, it's not less challenging than mentoring. Because for me, mentor lies on the mentee, not on me. So it's not me pushing myself on someone. Hence, the question that you're asking is important for me. That what is it that you want? It's not about, let me tell you what to do. I want you to be here. No. So the process is driven by the mentee more than me.
Because when you're a teacher, you're telling.
Yeah, telling. So, but mentoring is that the mentee tells you, this is where I want to be. Can you please guide me to there? So the process for me is very important because it's driven by the mentee. Yeah. And sometimes it's challenging because you might think this you need to do 1, 2, 3, and if you do that, then that's teaching. And by the end of the day, you'd see about Jabulani, a lot of them, But when mentoring, when you give them a chance, and for example, I mean, I was born in 1983, and so I have a certain relationship with the past, like apartheid and stuff. But the people that I'm mentoring today, they don't have that.
Yeah.
So it's very important for me to be careful of making sure that I don't push myself, to that. So make sure that, what is it? How do you relate with this? And one thing that I've realized for sure that from their parents, it gets to be inherited from there, because of, you see, sometimes they have this fear of looking like a white person, and you see that, okay, this is the results of 1, 2, 3, but it's not like me pushing myself. So mentoring for me, it's more, and the question I was saying is very important that you've asked. I always ask, like, you are the one who's going to drive. I'm here. You can fly as much as you can, and you know that I'm here. And literally it means sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes because of they're still young, like mentoring people who are young, is that they make a lot of mistakes. And in those mistakes, there's some learning that they learn, and sometimes we want, as mentors, we don't want that falling part. We want only the being able to fly, Whenever they hit the ceiling and come back, you become angry because of patience. So one of the things that I've realized, like being patient, being patient.
It's like being a parent.
Sure.
With a parent, like
exactly.
You don't want your child to fall, but all of us, a lot of the lessons that we've learned, a lot of the things that we understand on a fundamental level are because we fell.
Sure.
Yet at the same time, it's very hard when you're working with somebody younger than you, whether it's a mentee, whether it's a child, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a relative, to actually leave them the space to fall.
Yeah.
And also learn the lessons out of that falling.
Sure. I think that's a very important thing as mentors or as adults, to allow them. For me, is that because of, when they self-driving this, for me, it goes a long way. Yeah, it goes a long way. It doesn't become where you always have to be there, Yeah. The starting point is very important, to show them, to give them that I trust in you. I can do this. And I'm here not to make sure that you don't fall, but to make sure that with that falling, we bring understanding, we bring growth in, we analyze it, so that you don't always become on the floor, but we make
without judgment.
Without judgment, for sure.
I think that's a lesson. A lot of us older than a certain age I know that I'm still trying to learn that. And I have children, but I'm still trying to learn that every day.
Sure. You're right, it is a lesson. I mean, for me, it is a journey, It's not like you can't arrive, like you arrive. It's like always have different challenges. You think now, for example, if you're in the space that I work in, is that it's directly mentoring. And maybe after 5 years, we think, yeah, but now I know. And then the next group, you see different challenges. And, so hence I'm saying it's a journey being a mentor.
So when you were graduating,
Sure.
in your mind, what did your life look like? You're now graduating, you've got the diploma, you're a photographer.
Sure.
You also have, you have a piece of paper that says you're a photographer.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have a picture of what your life looked like, say, 5 years from then?
I would say it was very difficult, because I remember we were always told by our lecturers, especially I'd like to thank Yaku Domen at that time. You'd always tell us that, with photography, it's not like other courses where when you graduate, for sure you think about working somewhere. He told us practically, or you know what, let us for 3 months, let us buy a newspaper. Look at the they call it
classified. Yeah.
Classified, yeah. Look for photography jobs. Yeah, like so we didn't see any. And even sometimes when you see the government institutions where they advertise, almost of the times that they have people already. That it's by luck. It's by luck that you'd get a job. And yeah, for me when I graduated, so it was more, going back, and I thought at that time, like going back and with you maybe opening a studio, because I respected the photography that I was doing at that time, like my weddings and parties, because I've managed to pay for my studies, and that I've always, even when I was doing, studying during over the weekends, I'd go back to Soweto and do parties and weddings, and I had respect for business. And at that time I thought, okay, going back would be, because I saw the hope that it hold on my mother and my siblings, and when I was graduating, and I could feel, for sure the pressure, but also, and because I saw that for them, they don't understand maybe that part of might have graduated, but I can't apply anywhere and stuff. Yeah. So I had to be ready for, maybe in terms of the business. But luckily is that I used to assist a lot of photographers, like food photographers. Yeah. Because of so I'd always know. Yeah, I wanted to knock, Yeah. So I wanted to knock, I even food, like for me, photography was a thing, like photography. I didn't want to say, no, I'm a what photographer, what, even though fine art photography was more where I would express myself, but I always knocked, and, I assisted food photographers and fashion photographers, and yeah, that's how I was living at that time.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us. What do they teach you in a university course? Is the focus, do they do any type of business aspect, or is it just on photography side, making photographs?
Yeah, it was more, at that time, I think it was more photography. But now things are changing because of I think they've realized that, after graduating, what's then, and then, because at that time, I think we did the latest technology, which was a subject that was added that you need to know whenever, because technology is changing. And I think they've introduced the business part of it, that even how they teach is that so you can just open your business. Because I think that's the most important one in terms of what we're facing in South Africa, because that's also one of the challenges that I've realized. Even mentoring, like, I always ask myself, how do I say, looking at what is happening in terms of photography and employment and stuff, is that it needs to be passion driven. You know, I can't promise you. I always tell them there's nothing I can promise you, because I think whenever it's not something that will change, because for sure one thing that from where we're coming from in the townships, that we have hope of changing our backgrounds where we're coming from. And photography, I don't think it's that for me. It gives the freedom of telling your own story, you know, in the way that you'd love your story to be told. And
because I was going to ask, I mean, how do you live? So for example, as a writer, right?
Sure.
I have found a balance. Well, it's not a balance because now it's gone the other way.
Sure.
But I write for clients. So I do business writing, I do corporate writing. That enables me to keep the roof over the head, food on the table, the kids in school, and also then gives me the space to do my other stuff, whether it's writing fiction, writing nonfiction for myself, doing a podcast. But it's taken me years of working. So I've been in Johannesburg for what? Just over 20 years, right? So 20 years of working in different places in this city and building relationships and building a professional reputation. It's taken me all of that time to get to a point where I can get clients, business clients who will pay me to enable me the space to do my more creative stuff. And sometimes, or a lot of the time, that takes over all of my time that I don't get time for my creative stuff.
Sure.
So I'm wondering from a photography perspective, first of all, how you navigate it, because, and we'll talk about that, but I mean, I've looked at your work and you are positioned more as essentially a documentary photographer. And essentially an artist.
Yeah.
So not necessarily doing the weddings and stuff that you used to do, which for a lot of photographers is their bread and butter.
Yeah.
So how do you then find that space to live and be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve? And then also when you're now talking to young people coming to the space, knowing the challenges.
Sure. Yeah. You know, for me, I love saying, Guti, if they must learn, I always tell them that they must learn photography. And because of, even with photography, it's very, very important what you've shared. Very, very important. If you are, especially an artist, you know that, you know, it's a process of growing, you know, being represented by a gallery. You're not going to sell for 50,000 today, you know.
Yeah.
You need to invest in your time. You need to, and that, you know, the challenge is our background. You know, it's our background, because of it's not patient enough with us, that you need to push, and even people are, you know, putting you under pressure. No, but we have done 1, 2, 3. So we're expecting 1, 2, 3, you know. But I always tell them that for me, there's always an advantage to study, to know photography. Most of it all is it's learning photography, so as to survive, you know, and do exactly what you're sharing. That and for me, that it allowed me, you know, I use, you know, even for sure now I don't do it that often because I'm quite occupied in terms of the mentoring and, you know. But I used to do it every weekend, do my weddings and stuff. And those are behind the scenes, you know, like as in even commercial photography, I would do, and to finance what I love doing. And for sure I'd have that time, but I always had that time of making sure that I put time aside for my work, you know, for me to express, because I'm a very shy person who normally speaks to myself, you know, so I always respect that time. I need to have that time of me walking in the streets and like just talking to myself, most of the time, because of growing up in the spaces that we grew up that I grew up in, is that it most of the time is that, so there are things that I couldn't express, that I couldn't say because of this, like the home situation, and because of we're struggling and stuff. So there are things that you had to like pretend as if you don't mind, but when you are alone, and then you do reflect on that. And I so hence I always have these times for me. I put them aside. I'm strict on them, that I need to have my own time. I need to have where I need to make sure that, because of also one of the things that in terms of mentoring I saw that you need to model. So I need to make sure that there's certain progress. There's I can't take 3 years not producing, 2 years not producing a new body of work. So I need to make sure that I make time for myself. And for sure, I was lucky that I work with of Soul and Joy. And for me, one thing that I love is that, one, it allows me to be me. It allows me to, like the freedom that it is given to me. It's not only to the people that I'm mentoring, but also to me and to my family direct, that I can fetch my kids from school and always have time. And,
How did that opportunity come about?
Sure, of working with Of Soul and Joy. So I've always, like I've said, I've wanted to give back, and and I think they invited me to share my work with the students. I think it was 2014, and I thought when I went, I love the energy, what was happening, and the students. And I felt, I felt at home, And when I was approached to come and be a manager of the project, for me it was that thing of, because of I think I went 3 times before I was given a role of mentoring or managing Of Soul and Joy. And I always, because of it was in my heart, like just interacting with these youngs, Bolindo Guhle, what's a piece. So they were young at that time, but they were very, for sure they were not on their foundation, Lindo Guhle, it's a piece. So I loved the energy that they had at that time, and I thought this was a great space, like for me to grow, that, I thought it was for me to grow, but also for me to share what I was given, especially by Abu Kenneth, like the street photographers. Sure.
I mean, what have you had to learn? What are the biggest lessons? Because you're still a photographer, but now you're also managing.
Sure.
You're not just mentoring. You're actually managing a program.
Yeah.
What have been your biggest lessons in terms of just understanding that framework?
For me, is that, Hans, I've said, I'm not that person who loves pushing myself into things. I always say, Of Soul and Joy is a home. And a home is that it can't be only be directed by one person. I want my couch to be here, 1, 2, 3, In a home we collaborate. So I've always liked that way of working, in that is that, let's collaborate. Because of here, I'm not trying to change my life. I'm not trying to give a platform to myself, but I'm also want to give a platform to you. And what is it that you're looking for? Let's shape this together so that it becomes a great space for us. And so my way is always, for sure, when I started, it was challenging in terms of, remember, as artists, is that managing like paperwork and stuff. Those are the things that would sometimes not be strong on. But I had to work on that. And that's a learning part for me also, that I had to learn. But okay, I need to improve on 1, 2, 3. And, even now I'm still learning other things. And because of, I think when you become too comfortable, that's when you don't grow. And then So for me, it's always that, there's always that challenge that I always challenge myself with, okay, 1, 2, 3. And from now, let me make sure that I can do 1, 2, 3. As a photographer, not only a photographer, because of my father, my husband, and there's a lot that is expected from me. So I need to make sure that I'm competent. not only on sharing the skills, but make sure that I'm competent enough to, even if anything happen, I can still continue. Yeah.
With your photography, this is something, you've had quite a few solo exhibitions and group exhibitions.
Sure.
But I was curious with your solo exhibitions.
Yeah.
This is the question that this morning I was sitting there going, when you're embarking on a project or a body of work or a collection or exhibition or whatever you want to call it, are you always making photographs and then you're sitting and going, what's a story, what's a narrative I'm looking to bring together? Or do you sit and go, this is a conversation I want to have?
Sure.
And then go out and make photographs.
Yeah, sure. So for me, thank you for the question. I think I like, it's in two ways, and because of my work, remember I'm also inspired. I'm inspired by Ngungi wa Thiong'o when he speaks about the past being the present, which is the future. So my work always, I always, it's more of wanting to make our past clearer and clearer so that we can understand where we are, and for sure that informs where we're going. And so it's always been that for me, my work I've always liked that. I've always liked history, and also trying to, because I like saying Guti, I was born in 1983. I remember when my grandfather, Bogu, he was a leader of the Dhlaminis in that area, but he used to work for a farmer, which happens to be white. And the relationship between him, even the child of a farmer, my grandfather would say he was a slave. Like I didn't like how he was treated. I still remember the young boy, he was pointing him in the forehead, and I remember my grandfather, instead of making sure that he deals with the situation, and then he said, but you're not supposed to say this. Then I'm not going to come with you at work anymore. And at that time I was young and I didn't understand this. And and later on I realized that, my relation, especially because I think my relation changed in terms of me relating with white people. I think it changed when I worked with Ofsol and Joy, because Lorraine Gobin, they make, like, it's not a saying of Chabu feel at home. No, they make, like, it becomes a home. And but I used to have that internal fear that I took from my grandfather, that I took from my parents. And so I realized that sometimes our parents have tried so hard to hide the pain, so hard to make sure that so they're trying hard to protect us, but yet we saw them limping. And we limped too, because we thought this is how we should walk. And that, like where I'm talking about this trauma inheritance, not being in there, but you inherit this from your parents. Because if you see them limping and you think this is how we should walk. And so my work for me, and it's always been not trying to resolve, but trying to inform my past and trying to make sense of it so that I can be at better stage to take certain decisions.
Because also at another level, it's not that long ago.
Sure.
We're not talking about, you talk about parents and grandparents.
Yeah.
We're not talking about ancient history.
No. Sure.
But also with the lack of, let's say, archiving, with the lack of documenting that in its honesty, we don't then engage with it. We end up sweeping it under the carpet. So you're talking about the idea of the Rainbow Nation.
Sure.
Without looking at the foundation and kind of going, let's just put this over. Let's put a plaster, over the wound, hoping that beneath this it'll heal.
Exactly.
It'll heal solidly.
So we don't want to put up the work that is needed to heal. And for me, I'd say so. My photography has always been that, and so I always have these ideas of, looking back. I started in Sharpeville massacre, and that was a reason, because of my starting point. I've looked at back, so my starting point with my grandfather, but also Sharpeville, my aunt, and I've always wanted to make sure that, because I believe Guti, when we speak, about this, that's a great starting point than hiding, because since I'm saying that when we see them limping, that they bleed on us, and then we fight back because we don't know what is it exactly, and it becomes, the whole family becomes wounded. But if we speak, we have time to talk about it. I think that's a great starting point. 1, 2, 3, it's happening. That 1, 2, 3 has happened. And I think the likes of ETRC and because I have interviewed a lot of let's say survivors like Soweto uprising, Sharpeville massacre, and I've seen Guti, even though the TRC like allowed people to speak, but it was more controlled. And it's not because I always say it's like mentoring, healing. There's I like saying overall my body of work, I call it ukuzikhotha manxeba. My intent is to create a healing space for myself, but also for the people that I'm encountering, because I think the Sotho series is so simnati ke mga sona. So the wound, you only understand the pain of the wound, the person. So now with my work is to create that space for you to look at your wound, because I think what has happened to Black people is that, it's not a wrong approach, but we've always thought that something's gonna happen, be done by white people, and then we're gonna be healed. We didn't realize that needs to come from within. Whatever they can say, whatever can happen, but it needs to come from within, because if we understand that the wounds, I don't know isn't how deep is the wound? It's us who understand. Hence, then for me the work intent or inspired to create that space of talking to self. Because when I was doing the project in Sharpeville, I realized that a lot of people have forgotten about themselves. Like my aunt will always narrate about how she lost her legs. She has never told us when we grew up, she has never told us how beautiful she was. And when I was creating this project in Sharpeville, I loved that we went and looked at the old images of her. And, for me then, it gave me hope in a way that it have made her to access herself. Because of Sharpeville and the shooting, it's not herself, but it has changed her life. It has changed her life. And I wouldn't say there's a healing, because I'm expecting in terms of that. But I like the fact that we could look at the photographs and speak about her beauty. Not coming from me, but coming from her. And for me, that was hope, Yoguti. And this conversation needs to be heard, needs to be we need to have this started. Yes, it needs to be started. This conversation.
I think also it's important that, let's call it the ordinary person.
Sure.
Because these conversations and these stories always come from people who are held up as examples.
Sure.
Whereas we forget that behind them or off to the side, when we talk about, Sharpeville, when we talk about Hector Peterson.
Yeah.
You have certain people and certain names, but there were hundreds behind that who nobody knows about.
Yes.
Unless you're from the community.
Sure.
Who are carrying their own wounds and haven't had a space, however small it may seem to somebody else, to be able to voice their pain and their suffering, to start to find some element of peace and healing.
My brother, that's true. You've said it all. Because for me, that is the main aim of my work. Because I love to give a mic to someone because of that, especially, for example, when you look at Sharpeville, is that my aunt was not an NC or PAC. So she was never given a space at any time to tell her story, because she didn't affiliate with any of these two parties. And that, for me, I felt the stories of ordinary people, we get to miss. Then we got this problems because we only look at the stories one-sided, but hearing from a lot of people, it gives us a certain, meat to, as in content to deal with. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I was reading somewhere your project around the passing and the funeral of Winnie Madikizela Mandela.
Sure.
And I read somewhere that you made the decision not to take pictures of the funeral itself.
Sure.
But literally what was happening around, including like the day before.
Yeah.
Which then taps into the impact of this person and how their passing is affecting ordinary people and society at large. And not just looking at, okay, this is the event that is happening.
Sure.
Somebody's getting buried. Sure. These are the people that are there. This is what it looks like.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, it's always been, I've seen how even Sharpeville, a lot of people have captured it, and but I felt it was just that event type of a thing, like, it happened and it's passed. But I lived with my aunt and he always narrated this, and then I felt good. And no one wanted to listen to her at home, like older people, because of, they're also wounded. So he should only tell us, the young ones. But that's when I realized, this was not an event. It kept living even after, and so for me, my interest is always to look at that. Even with Mama Winnie, I saw that because of, for me, for sure, Mandela, like, we had a lot of images at home, but the person that when we went to Amarallis with my aunt, sometimes with my father, is that Mama Winnie was, so for me, like, I would say, for sure, I agree with people, like, Mandela was, the image of Ifrumnan. But for me, is that when I I was very young, we're very, very, very young. When they took me to these places where they had rallies and stuff, I'd always see Umamuin. And I saw how her passing, it can't be an event. Yeah. So always, I'm more interested in seeing these things as not as events, because of as events they die and we think, hence we can ask people, but how long? Like, we're still talking about apartheid today, because of it's an event that is past event. So I'm not expecting you to be talking about it today. It's an event that we can, so, and that for me, it's a problem.
So what does the future look like now for you? From a personal perspective, from a work perspective?
Sure.
Where are you now in terms of your life journey?
No, it's a very important question, brother. Is that for sure I need to have time and reflect, because I think I'm deep in now, because I remember around the space of soul and joy, and I really enjoy what's happening, like looking at, meeting these young ones from the age of 11, 13, not knowing anything about photography. And in 5 years' time, they expressing themselves in a certain way. They, even at home, things are changing, because I think my main aim with of Soul and Joy, with Irubis Mesenand, is that we realize that certain carriers were, as Black people, were excluded. And so when we teach these young ones, is to reach the whole the broader community. And I see that happening in terms of, like, after 5 years, you see them, some of them joining galleries, some of them making, like, being in a better state and changing the backgrounds where they're coming from. I think for me that, that gives me joy in a way. That, so I'm at the point where I'm looking at, because it started in 2012, those who started in 2012, I was not there at the time, but I'm looking at where they are now, evaluating, always I'm at the point where I evaluate, because of, what I like about Ofsolonje is that it becomes a home where the older ones, like Awolindo Guhle, Tsepiso Masbugo, Spusiso, they come back and mentor these young ones again. It becomes that secular. It becomes like that. And but it gives me joy then in terms of like looking as even after the group of 2012, there are other these young Abu Vuyo Mapega, Abu Man that are coming, that are and so I think we are for sure growing, especially in Togoza. Hence, I think for me it's time to also to visit other places because of, as I've said, I was born in the rural areas of KZN, and I've realized that when I visit there, that I think there's less understanding, there's less, they still can't access. So I think with Ofsolonjo, with Irubis, is that we are embarking on reaching more communities.
Okay.
And so we are doing this rural area projects, and also, for example, for sure in other places like in Soweto, we're visiting art projects that we may share because our students, I think, are growing and they are becoming the space where they can also mentor. And we start sending them in different places so that we share what we have and also learn from them, because I don't believe that it's only us teaching, but it's also learning something from them. So we are doing that. Like, for example, last year we were in KZN and Ngutu, where we did a workshop, and then we did a community exhibition, which was very challenging, but it was good because it was a start. And going forward, we know, okay, now we are moving to Limpopo, and then we'll go back to KZN again, and sure.
And from a personal level, I mean, I see you just had a project last year. A collaborative project with what's it,
Tembinkosi.
That's right.
That's right. Sure.
Is there anything that you're thinking about in the pipeline, or are you just continuously making, like I asked earlier on, like you'll go out and give yourself the space to make certain photographs and see what comes of those later on?
No, currently I'm working on a project with, there's a curator from, used to say in South Africa, but he's working for Yale University.
Okay.
And he's looking at the historical body of work that looks at the kings that, that ran away from KZN. Like we're going to, like I just came from Mozambique, and in Nwala Memorial, and looking at those Zulus like Uzwangendaba and Mzilikazi. So I'm going around in Africa as far as not Angola, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, so those spaces. I'm currently, that's for this year, concentrating on that a lot, And it's been a great, because I think it's something that I was also starting because of, I think when I was in Ngutu, I was more interested in understanding the history of Isandlwana. And, so this has given my base in terms of the starting point and everything, like as an understanding of Isandlwana, those wars and what happened in Isandlwana, because I think there's less that is being said about it, So I think this has given me that vehicle also to take a tour in terms of my work and look at that,
Thank you very much, my brother.
I think
you're doing important work. I mean, I'm a big believer in archiving, and I don't think that as Africans we do enough of that. We do enough of documenting the ordinary, not in a negative way. Most of us fall within there.
Sure.
So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. But I must say, for me, that for sure is that, hence, I think the importance of language, that one that I see, because of that's how we normally archive, looking at language and Sesotho in all of these languages, that because the culture of archiving is that we have seen that, it can't be dealt with, that's how we would hide some of isn't, a lot of things would be hidden in our language, and so there's always that importance of going back, and hence, or even of Solonjo, is that one of the strongest points for me is that we deal with the language itself, and then we get to interpret what we're doing later. There's an English teacher, but the photography, I don't think it's something that could be taught in English, because of it needs to come from within. And yeah, for sure. But thank you very much, my brother,
Thanks,
for
man.
the space.
Sure. The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is produced by Zebra Culture. If you have ideas of what we can do better, people you'd like us to have a conversation with, or would just like to share a thought, you can email me on info@zebraculture.com. To check out past episodes, go to kojobuffer.com/podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, Listen to Your Footsteps, check out kojobuffer.com/book. There are details on the various spaces it's available at. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review or comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, there's the Zebra Culture by Kojo Buffer newsletter, where on a weekly basis, I share a curated list of articles, playlists, videos, etc. that have caught my attention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.